Hey guys, what's up? We're going to take a look at chapter 3 of the American Pageant. So let's take a look at what's going on. So one of the big things, right, of course, that we're going to take a look at is the importance of the Protestant Reformation. So again, 1517, Martin Luther, he nails his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Cathedral. Essentially what ends up happening, right, is that he becomes very popular, but this was happening throughout Europe where people were questioning what was going on in terms of the Catholic Church, and there was this whole idea of selling indulgences, right? So his claim was that the Bible alone was a source of God's word, right? So again, questioning the authority of a priest and all these other things, and that people were saved by faith in Christ, right? So their faith, and not necessarily again, right, the everything that came with being a Catholic. Piggybacking on what had already been established, John Calvin of Switzerland preached Calvinism, which added to it, right? What he added was this idea of predestination. In 1536, the Institutes of the Christian Religion were born. The idea that all humans were weak and wicked, right? So the idea of original sin. Calvinists were expected twice to work hard and seek conversion. So the Calvinists, again, right, predestination, that only those who worked extremely hard could possibly receive God's blessing to know what their fate was. And so this eventually becomes the idea of the Protestant work ethic. Again, here's a picture of Martin Luther, right, or a painting of him. John Calvin. So King Henry VIII and the birth of the Anglican Church, right, so the Protestant Church. So again, English Protestants called themselves Puritans, wanted to purify the Church of England of all things Catholic. They believed only the visible saints should be admitted to church membership. And so again, if you really think about it, right, that would be the educated people who, like I said, had been educated in the Bible and everything else. So if you were this poor person who, could not read, or so you're illiterate or whatever, you would not question these things, right? And again, you were taught to not question. And again, if you haven't read, like I said, all of these different things, right, you're going to see that you're going to have these visible saints that are going to have power. Eventually, we're going to get a group called separatists, right, who vowed to break away from the Church of England because the saints would have to sit with the damned. And so, again, they did not feel like that the Anglican Church was purifying things Catholic fast enough. Again, here's a painting of King Henry VIII, the Puritans. So the Pilgrims, right? King James I had harassed the separatists because he did not like that they questioned his authority. 1609, some separatists moved to the Netherlands, but then 10 years later decided to leave because of the Dutchification of their children. In that same year, they got permission from the Virginia Company to travel to Virginia. Their 65-day journey led them to New England in 1620, and again, we'll address some of the things regarding that in class and whether or not there was any type of mischief that went along with it. So you can see here, this is by Boston, right? So this is in Massachusetts where they ended up landing. And of course that is the Mayflower, or a replica of the Mayflower. So less than half of the Pilgrims were separatists. They settled again in Plymouth. They were squatters because they didn't have permission there. Before they stepped off, they constructed the Mayflower Compact. Again, one of the misconceptions or misnomers is that it was a constitution, but in fact it was not a constitution. It was just a step towards self-government. So if you really think about it, it was like a social contract, right? This idea that this is how we are going to behave with one another. Just a painting of it. So again, the winter of 1620 and 1621, only 44 of the 102 people there survived. One of the things that's really important to understand, right, it was very similar to what happened at Jamestown. 1621 brought harvest and the first Thanksgiving, right? So, again, with help from the native people of the area, they were able to get by. William Bradford became the governor, and he became really, really important. In 1691, Plymouth merged with Massachusetts Bay. And so one of the things that ends up happening, right, is that you get a larger colony. Eventually, the Massachusetts Bay colony comes in, and it swallows up the Plymouth one. So again, a painting of the first Thanksgiving. Real cute. So 1629, there were other non-separatist Puritans who got a road charter. So again, that meant that they didn't necessarily want to leave. but they got a royal charter from England to settle in the New World. 11 ships were granted permission with over 1,000 people. The governor of Massachusetts Bay will be John Winthrop. And this is really important because his whole idea was that we want to make sure that we can establish a city upon a hill. So the idea that we want to take God's laws and make them man's laws, right? And he believed that the United States, that this was his city upon a hill would be a beacon for everybody. Many historians kind of root this with the idea of American exceptionalism, right? That to this day we sort of still see ourselves as the beacon for all other civilization. So you could see here just the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and in terms of getting swallowed up or swallowing up Plymouth, and just some of the other stuff that's going to develop, right? Having Maine, and eventually in 1820, Maine will, after the Revolution and everything else, Maine will become a state in its own. But again, the land territories belonging to Massachusetts, and then during the Articles of Confederation, given up. Economically viable, Massachusetts was in fur trading, fishing, and shipbuilding. It established the franchise, which was the right to vote to all free men. So again, there's this question of, is this truly democratic, right? And so if you think about it, right, so this idea of the franchise means to vote. So if it means to vote, is that representative, right? Is it a democracy? And so the question is it a limited democracy, right? That the idea that only 2 of the 5 adult males could vote. So the government was not a democracy, right? Winthrop actually called democracy the meanest and worst because he didn't trust the people. This word trust is going to become really important, especially with the democracy. Some of the people there, John Cotton and other clergymen, created laws to curb moral behavior. So again, taking this idea that trying to take God's laws and curb the behavior of human beings through man's laws. So again, picture of John Cotton. So tensions began to arise in Massachusetts. Not everybody agreed with the way that they were being done. One of these people was Anne Hutchinson, who began to preach antinomianism. She was brought to trial in 1638. She was banished from Massachusetts, ended up in Rhode Island, right, at Rogues Island. She later died at the hands of some of the native people. Roger Williams, of course, hounded clergy to make complete breakaway from the Anglican Church. Began to argue for secularism, right? The idea that we cannot possibly take all of God's laws and make them man's laws. He was banished in 1635 and founded Rhode Island. The church he established there was a Baptist church, and it is the first official Baptist church in the United States. Again, you have Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams. So Rhode Island was founded as a squatter colony, again by Roger Williams. Again, like I said, he was the father of the Baptist church. They were against special privilege. Again, they were founded on the principles of questioning. It was nicknamed Rogues Island or Sewer, right? Because all the unwanted people got to go there. 1635, Hartford, Connecticut was founded by the Reverend Thomas Hooker. I always make a joke about this, right? How funny is it that there is a guy, essentially a minister, right, with the name Hooker. Just cracks me up. 1639, one of the things that they did in Connecticut is they founded the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut were written. It is a modern-day constitution. That is for real. 1638, New Haven was founded, but eventually merged with Connecticut. 1623, Maine was absorbed by Massachusetts. 1641, New Hampshire was absorbed into Massachusetts, but in 1679, the king made New Hampshire a royal colony. So again, meaning that it's under the status of the king. And again, New England, you can see how it eventually gets all cut up. So English letters had arrived to this area prior to 1620, and we believe that a lot of the native people prior to 1620, the arrival of the Pilgrims there, that the population of the native people had been decimated because of contact with English fishermen who had actually named the area New England. So they had brought disease, right, smallpox with them. English had a native guide by the name of Squanto, who actually had been taken by some of those fishermen that had come early on. He was of the Wampanoag people. In 1637, there was a big war called the Paquette War. In 1675, there was a huge war called King Philip's War. His native name was Metacom. United the neighboring tribes against the English, and they lost. And this is a huge result, right? very similar to what happened with the native people, the Powhatan people. So again, King Philip. So in 1643, 4 colonies actually had banded together to form the New England Confederation. Massachusetts, Plymouth, Connecticut, and New Haven. They were all Puritan. This confederation, though, was kind of weak, didn't last. And then one of the things that we'll see is that when the Restoration period occurs, which we'll talk about a little later, he tried to control the colonies a little bit more. Since Massachusetts would not listen, Connecticut received charter, Rhode Island received a charter, and in 1684, Massachusetts actually had their charter revoked because of all the questioning. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but what the New England Confederation would have looked like. Then in 1686, the Dominion of New England was created to kind of enforce the navigation laws that we will talk about in class. It was, again, supposed to help in terms of defense against the natives. It was supposed to help tie the colonies closer to England. It was also helped to, like I said, enforce the navigation laws. What were the navigation laws? Right, the navigation laws were there to enforce mercantilism. So some of the things that they did is they forbade American trade with countries other than Great Britain. So everything had to go through Great Britain. Smuggling became very common, and the head, like I said, it was this guy by the name of Sir Edmund Andros, who was not liked by the colonists, and because he was very loyal to the Church of England, he would tax without the consent of the people, curb town meetings, and he restricted the courts. Again, Dominion of New England, Sir Edmund Andros. So one of the things that ended up happening too is James II, who is the Catholic brother of Charles II. He is named, of course, after his grandfather, James I. Protestant nobles persuaded William and Mary, the daughter and son-in-law of James I of the Netherlands, to go and invade Spain and to remove this Catholic heathen. So the Glorious Revolution took place in 1688, crushing the Dominion of New England also. Massachusetts got a new charter in 1691 that actually extended all voting to all men, and that's huge. 17th century, the Netherlands gained independence from Spain. One of the things that they did is they established what it became known as the East India Company. 1609, Henry Hudson claimed the area around New York for the Dutch. They bought Manhattan Island for $24 an acre. I'll talk a little bit about my house. They called the area New Amsterdam. It was a company town, which meant like it was meant to make money, and so anybody who was anybody could come. And they started a patroonship, which meant that they would actually grant 50 acres of land, or excuse me, just land, like company land, to anybody who would actually bring 50 people over to work. And as a result of all this, it actually became a very diverse colony. You can see the voyages of Henry Hudson. Again, Henry Hudson. And so this is New Amsterdam, right? This is the Hudson River on the left. You have the East River, and then you can see where Wall Street was built. And I'll talk a little about that in class. So many clashes between the natives and the Dutch for the New Yorkers, right, or the New Amsterdam people. New England was not happy with the Dutch growth. New Sweden in 1635 became very hostile with everybody. The Dutch actually built a wall for protection called Wall Street, and in 1635 the Dutch were successful in kicking the Swedes out. So what ends up happening is this idea of, okay, well, the Dutch are... So in 1664, Charles II granted the area of New Netherlands to his brother, the Duke of York, James II. And he basically told him, like, hey, if you want some land, go in there and essentially, like, kick their butt and take them out, and it's yours, right? And so James II was hooked up with James I, or excuse me, with Charles II. New Amsterdam became New York, remained autocratic. Many of the Dutch names remain there too, like Brooklyn, Easter eggs, Santa Claus, waffles, sauerkraut, bowling, sleighing, skating, and golf were very popular. And then, of course, we had the Quakers, and the reason they're called the Quakers is because they actually quaked. The idea that they were in such deep prayer that they would shake. They were very secular. This is super important, right, to understand that they were very, very secular. So again, this idea that, you know what, like, it is right to separate church and state. Again, they obviously very simple, devoted, democratic, against war and violence, so the king did not like them. So William Penn, a well-born Englishman, had embraced the Quaker faith, and in 1681 secured land from King Charles II because he had owed his father. And Pennsylvania literally means Penn's Woods. The best advice, it was the best advertised and most diverse of all the colonies. So thousands of squatters already lived in Pennsylvania. So the city of brotherly love, right, Philadelphia. Penn bought the land from the Lenape Indians, which are essentially the Delaware Indians. Penn, really important to understand that he respected the native people. The openness of Pennsylvania meant more and more people would come that did not share in his view, which it's kind of the irony, right? Freedom of worship, except for Jews and Catholics. No restriction on immigration. Developed dislike for slavery, which is going to be huge, right? Because the first abolitionist movement places will be from there. Again, you have here James II, the Duke of York, gave land grant to two friends that had remained loyal to Charles during the English Civil War, and as a result, the area was renamed for them, and it became known as New Jersey in 1664. Delaware was established in 1664. It was not a separate colony, but it's an extension of Pennsylvania. And again, so we'll take a look at some of the other stuff in class, but I wanted to make sure that we began to at least address some of the things that are here.